Well, it was a stunt, wasn't it? And it failed appallingly. During yesterday's question time, Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese, as I went through this last night, he rose to move a motion expressing support and praise for the people of Victoria making it through the worst of the lockdowns. And when given his opportunity, Albanese spoke for just 7 of his allotted 15 minutes. His Deputy Leader, Richard Marles, he's a Victorian, I might add, well, he could only speak for 5 out of his allotted 10 minutes. And a lot of the crowing was about rewarding Daniel Andrews, they said, for getting Victorians through a mess of his own making. To make matters worse, in came the Prime Minister and his Treasurer with rousing speeches of support.
The Victorian people have suffered so much. The pain, the cost, the loss of Victorian people. It should have never, ever have come to this.
Our government has stood by Victorians every single day of the lockdown that became necessary as a result of the outbreak that got out of control.
The comparison is not with the United Kingdom. The comparison is not with the United States. The comparison is with New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania. It's South Australia, Mr Speaker.
As we look to the future, we cannot look to a future of lockdowns as a way of managing this virus.
All right, let's bring in the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, for his analysis. Paul, you know, I thought yesterday was a real tactical and political blunder there by the opposition leader, and I wonder, you know, where the tin ear is inside his caucus room or a tactics team when they make these decisions about a stunt like that. But interestingly, it was like I was watching another prism in the media today, Twitter and The Guardian and others, all saying that there was a backlash against Frydenberg for the passion of his speech. There was no backlash in Victoria.
What we can say about this, Peter, is this was a bizarre tactic by the Labor Party. It misfired very badly. It exposed 2 things. The first was the credibility problem and the equivocal stance the Labor parties had for several months towards the situation in Victoria and the massive public policy failures of the Andrews government. And the interesting thing about the debate was that the Labor Party, led by Anthony Albanese, had very little to say about the substance of any of this apart from praising the Victorian people. The second point to make is that the best speeches were clearly from the government, from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, and the Treasurer was particularly forceful. His contribution was really important because he actually put on the table what people didn't seem to be prepared to discuss: the price paid by the Victorian people, whether we're talking now about jobs, business, small business, school kids in terms of mental health or whatever. It was really important if the National Parliament was going to discuss the issue, to actually discuss this with credibility and realism and actually talk about the price paid. And the Treasurer did that. He did that very effectively, and he was completely correct in the grab you have just shown to say the comparison was not between Victoria and other countries, it was between Victoria and New South Wales. So I understand the media comments made. Those media comments were misleading, and I think that they were unprofessional in the sense that they expected a debate in the federal parliament and complained when the parliament began to discuss the price paid. Well, if the parliament didn't discuss that, then it wasn't worthy of the name.
Look, you are 100% right. It's blood and treasure. You know, that's the saying. There is a huge price being paid. 40% of our nation's unemployed, 40% are in Victoria. So every other taxpayer around the country will be picking up the tab for the incompetence at government level here in Victoria. And I thought it was telling To pull on a stunt like that, I've been there in opposition, you walk in prepared if you're going to pull on the stunt that you might have to speak to it to full time. And when they were pushed, the Prime Minister moved to allow all Victorians in the chamber to speak to something as important as this. Labor could not support the numbers. They didn't have their people prepared. I think that shows you that Labor are still coming to grips with opposition, and they've been there for some time. I want to go to the other big announcement today, the High Court appointments made by the government, 2 replacement judges, Justice Simon Stewart and Justice Jackie Gleeson, filling vacancies that will be on the court following the retirement of Justice Geoffrey Nettle and Justice Virginia Bell.
High Court is one of the most important institutions of our democracy, and every justice appointed to it carries a significant burden to uphold the laws of our land. I congratulate Justice Stewart and Gleeson, and I wish them all the best for their very important service.
The name Gleeson's well known around legal circles. That's a very strong High Court pedigree for Jackie Gleeson. But Stewart also is very conservative, I can say that, black letter lawyer in terms of his judgments. Paul, pretty exceptional appointments.
Well, I think this continues what we would call the Australian tradition, as opposed to what we see going on in the United States. And that is, we've seen governments in this country of either persuasion, both coalition governments or Labor governments, making their own appointments, making their own selections to the High Court after a process of extensive consultation. And the quality of the High Court, I think, remains very impressive in this country, and it's impressive by international standards. And I think that those standards are going to be maintained by these appointments. I guess the point to make is that both these new judges are young. They're in their early 50s, so they'll be on the court for a long period of time. New South Wales and Victoria continue to dominate. That's not a surprise. But clearly, I think the government will be alert to that. There's always sensitivity coming from some of the smaller states at the dominance in the High Court traditionally coming from New South Wales and Victoria.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this will be something that is watched if there are coming vacancies as to where the Queensland perhaps. We know we already have a recent appointment from WA. South Australia's long been pushing hard. We'll see where all of that ends up.